have reported on this previously, but I've become increasingly aware of young males in North America, with actually a high proportion in Canada, expressing hardline Islamic views. Such views are often to the extreme of most Salafis and expressed with such force and certainty that they have alarmed me. Initially, my belief was that these were supporters of groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Maybe even these posts were part of a recruitment process. Researching these youths, I've often found that they are gamers. Why should this be? But I've also identified that most, despite purporting to be hardline Muslims, are actually Indian Hindus, albeit of the diaspora. I've even found one who was claiming to be a Christian and an ex-Muslim. Are they aware of the incredible damage that their posts are causing? The Islamic ulama is already massively divided between the majority and Salafis, with many of us from the majority fearful of expressing our views, especially on social media. But if those trolling us are not actually of the ulama, what does this mean? I'm not suggesting that some Muslims, again probably young gamers living in the West, do not express such hardline views. But how can we know they're not simply repeating the mischief of Hindus? Impostors. So certainly this mischief is causing rifts within Islam, maybe even radicalising some young Muslims. I cannot emphasise how concerned I am about these actions and their role in creating hatred and Islamophobia, maybe even leading to civil unrest and war. But now I find that Edward Snowden revealed that World of Warcraft and Second Life had been infiltrated by the CIA, NSA and GCHQ. Massive amounts of data, including country and time zone data, local IP addresses and realm server addresses, have been taken from these sites and analysed by the Echelon software. In fairness to the social security services, have claimed that they are simply identifying potential, and I don't think I can say the word, ists, known as Project Reynold. As argued in the 2007 NSA document, topics exploring the ist use of games and virtual environments, and that they were countering the activities of foreign actors such as China. Games companies track and log all activity, monitoring to a significantly higher degree than Microsoft does, than, for example, Microsoft does a service like Skype or Apple FaceTime. Online games require greater surveillance to mitigate player griefing, harassment and game exploitation. Games by definition invite exploitation and safeguarding against experience wrecking exploits, to say nothing of staving off armies of white, grey and black hat hackers looking to access private information, requires meticulous log keeping and cross-relational activity indexing. Games are thus the least innocuous place for ists or cyber criminals. World of Warcraft continues to uncover potential signet value by identifying accounts, characters and guilds related to Islamic extremist groups, nuclear proliferation and arms dealing. In other words, targets of interest appear to be playing the fantasy game, though the document does not indicate that what they were doing for any nefarious purpose. A British document from later that year said that GHQ had successfully been able to get the discussions between different games players on Xbox Live. According to minutes of a January 2009 meeting, GHQ's network gaming exploitation team had identified engineers, embassy drivers, scientists and other foreign intelligence operatives to be World of Warcraft players, potential targets for recruitment as agents. But the spying was so prolific, according to the documents, American agencies had to make special efforts to keep their operatives from bumping into each other in-world. Apparently, the CIA had been particularly active in chat rooms and creating characters in my own country, Indonesia. Supposedly, this is to counter Teaism. But there are far more instances of Teaism in the West than in Indonesia. Furthermore, by population, the number of Indonesians fighting for ISIS was very low compared to the rest. Are the Western security services to be believed? Psychological warfare, or the basic aspects of modern psychological operations, PSYOP. Various techniques are used and are aimed at influencing a target audience's value system, belief system, emotions, reasoning or behaviour. Mass communications allow for direct communication with a populace and therefore has been used in many efforts. Social media channels and the internet allow for campaigns of disinformation and misinformation performed by agents anywhere in the world. After all, most social media began life as CIA-funded research projects. This is now done through social media posts and increasingly on this platform. Creating vlogs which pursue a particular agenda or promote a particular piece of disinformation can have a devastating effect on political regimes. Many of these are now AI generated and their political bias and disinformation are often opaque. From a mobile phone, it's possible to track and trace the owner, providing information on where the target lives and what they look like. Each to understand the target's emotional state and to profile them, along with others. This then facilitates the listening in on and analysis of communications using electronic media. But it also means that social media can be sent to the target and specific messages sent to them. Thus, the very social media the target consumes can be controlled via psychological warfare. This has been proven to affect the beliefs of the target. The business of spying in online games generated millions for the private sector. SAIC and Lockheed Martin received multi-million-dollar government contracts to study the link between a person's online persona and their real-life behaviour. The New York Times web published a top-secret NSA memo and a redacted, updated primer by defence contractor SAIC, revealing massive government infiltration of games and social networks. The memo warns that gaming platforms can be a radicalising method for terrorist recruiters, and to avoid losing the high-stakes game of cyber influence, the SAIC primer advises that an in-game presence would allow intelligence agencies to identify important propaganda efforts and work with game producers to eliminate harmful or misleading information from the game space. Agents in avatars can exploit optimal message placement areas online to place counter-propaganda message of their own. Agents can even build relationships with influential avatars or guides to facilitate viral message spread or in-game dialogue for propaganda purposes. And most concerning, the military contracts its propaganda out to private firms, sometimes operating under loose guidance, sometimes using misattribution or stolen identities to obscure its source. Psychological profiling is a method of analysing a person's characteristics to protect their behaviour. It can be used in a variety of contexts, including criminal investigations and marketing. But it moved from criminal profiling to identifying ists and is being used in psychological warfare. Behavioural profiling is also known as behavioural analysis or behavioural science. Is a systematic process for examining, interpreting and predicting human behaviour based on observed patterns, actions and motivations. It involves the collection and analysis of data to uncover behavioural traits and tendencies. aiming to provide insights into why individuals act in specific ways. Profilers rely on a diverse range of sources, including surveys, interviews, social media, online activity, and even physical observations. The choice of sources depends on specific objectives of the profiling project. Behavioural data can be characterised into structured and unstructured types. Structured data includes quantitative information, such as survey responses and numerical ratings. Unstructured data comprises of textual data, audio recordings, images, and videos, which require more advanced analysis techniques. Profilers leverage a wide range of tools and techniques for data analysis. Advanced statistical methods, machine learning algorithms, and data visualization tools play a crucial role in uncovering patterns and insights within the data. Data analysis is where the magic happens, as it involves shifting through the collected data to identify meaningful patterns, trends, and correlations. Profilers use statistical techniques and machine learning algorithms to analyse the data and extract actionable insights. Profiles of potential opposition supporters can be developed from this social media targeted to them, but is often used to generate a number of profiles and create tribes which may be opposed to or support each other. Five Eyes is the intelligence alliance between the US, UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And maybe with the possible exceptions of China and Indonesia, the response in these nations to the health crisis was amongst the most draconian. We naturally believe that our security services serve the national interest, but do they? Often the legal oversight of their activities is curtailed, supposedly protect the national interests. But could it be more about self-preservation and indeed the growth of the service? Or even that they're more interested in promoting the interests of some companies, especially those that have been called surveillance capitalists, than those of all citizens of the nation? Also, it's wrong to see national security services monolithic. There are often disputes between branches and across organisations, such as the well-documented differences between the CIA and FBI in the late 1960s. On the 22nd of April 2020, during the UK's daily Congress briefing, General Nick Carter confirmed that the 77th Brigade were working with the Home Office Rapid Response Unit, helping to quash rumours from misinformation, but also to counter disinformation. On the 7th of March 2020, The Economist interviewed Carter on the role of the 77th Brigade in fighting the C-pandemic disinformation. The Defence Cultural Specialist Unit was used to monitor the internet for content on C and to look for evidence of disinformation related to C versus. An army source later told the Mail on Sunday that it was monitoring the UK population. A Dutch health minister, Fleur Agama, called the C pandemic a NATO military operation, and noting that it was led directly by the North Atlantic Alliance and the Netherlands National Coordination for Security and Counter-Terrorism, NCTV. NATO themselves admit that through the sea crisis, they had strengthened their cooperation with the European Union. And NATO and EU staffs exchanged information on steps being taken by both organisations to support NATO allies and their partners during the crisis. Seemingly innocent, until you question why. Does this explain the authoritarian response amongst 3i members? Well, it's almost certainly, I've just said 3i members, and I mean 5i members, sorry. well, almost certainly explains why Sweden, not then a NATO member, had a much more relaxed response. In fact, the authoritarian response was almost a perfect example of how to create fear, a byproduct being mistrust and anger, even trauma amongst a target population. Presumably, this also makes the population easier to predict and control. When did psychological warfare start to be used against citizens of their own countries? Well, I'm sure that you can point to potential psyops going back decades. Perhaps the most sceptics related to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But it would seem that the Brexit vote was the impetus for the British government to identify a potential problem. The Cambridge Analytics had been used to influence voter behaviour in favour of Brexit. The problem was that they'd used the very techniques in psychological warfare, and thus politicians reached to psychological warfare to protect their interests. Sorry, I mean national interests. Shortly afterwards, the initial election of Donald Trump caused an almost identical panic in the US. I seem to remember that in both countries, Russia were blamed for the manipulation, just as China has been identified for the reason for Western security services' interest in World of Warcraft. But now it would seem that factions within the US were involved, including former CIA operatives. Who knows what the aim and who instigated these? But it would reinforce my view that factions within nation states work against each other, rather than conspire in a unified direction. But now this Rubicon has been crossed, there are no limits to what government and their spooks can do on their citizens. Indeed, we have to consider that these increased powers were the motivation for the actions that resulted in them. So the Rubicon actually crossed in 2016, some 10 years after Western security services became active in gamers' chat rooms, etc. Indeed, Snowden claimed that the Government Communications and Security Bureau, GCHQ of New Zealand, were conducting surveillance on New Zealand citizens and engaging in espionage between 2008 and 2016. Well, maybe in 2006 they may simply have engaged in surveillance, but since 2019 their activities have become much more aggressive. So does this include behavioural profiling and manipulation of young gamers? Game developers employ behavioural specialists to ensure that gamers become addicted to their games. Thus my suspicions appear entirely possible when we consider the lack of care in targeting our children. Furthermore, such limbic capitalism is becoming all-embracing, creeping into the operations of even staid industries such as finance. Is this what is happening within gaming? But a vignette of the world we're rushing headlong into. Certainly my uncovering of a cabal of young Indian gamers in Canada would seem to suggest that some agency has been engaged in psychological profiling and manipulation on game sites. Not being a gamer myself, I couldn't possibly say which game or which agency, and thus must conclude that it's not necessarily evidence of friendly fire. But could this be the tip of the iceberg? Recently on my own channel I engaged with what I believe to be a Mossad agent, posing as a P-team supporter. Identifying my liberal attitudes, he asked me to join him. Recent events in Syria have confirmed the belief that I've repeated many times of Western intelligence infiltration, maybe even direct in Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Could it be that the games have been used to radicalise and recruit operatives for these groups? I think it's entirely possible. But can we be sure who is actually doing the radicalisation and recruitment? After all, it's obvious that Rubicon has been crossed.